Well, my friends, it has been a big week. Can you believe these scenes? Starship Flight Test 9 finally took flight after a fairly lengthy series of tests and fixes since Flight Test 8 a little over 11 weeks ago. A lot to catch you up on there as the story has unfolded over the past few days. The real breaking news, though, has been all around the key details from the Mars presentation that followed at Starbase, published on Thursday. With that, loads of space stuff outside too, so settle in. This one is massive.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
Hey, Marcus House with you here, and wow, it sure has been a mixed bag of a week. I'm sure by now you've watched the outcome of Starship Flight 9, but there was also plenty to miss. Now we've had a few days to digest it, there is a lot more here that we didn't pick up on the day. Strap in because there's a lot to take in. Of course, we left off last week right as the dummy Starlink simulator satellites were starting to get loaded into Ship 35. That took a bit longer than expected, but thankfully soon enough all 8 were moved into the ship. At the same time, Booster 14 had already made its way towards the launch site, and with the blink of an eye it was lifted into the launch mount ready for action. Almost at the same time, the payload bay door of Ship 35 had closed up, and if you look carefully you can actually see the hull of the ship slightly move. Out the ship came, but in this trip it almost seemed to race down the highway. It went straight to the tower arms, and a few hours later it was stacked smoothly, all ready to fly. Now, interestingly, as it was a holiday weekend, SpaceX wasn't able to close the beach and perform a partial tanking test like we have seen in the past. No, this in fact would become the first full stack to launch without any cryogenic liquids being loaded as a separate event beforehand. Before we knew it, SpaceX was live in glorious 4K to give us the best viewing angles as the propellant rapidly climbed the tanks on both vehicles. There were 2 small holds that looked like they might halt the launch for the day. One of these holds was an issue with a Raptor on the booster, and the second a ground system issue. Anyway, no problem there. The last nail-biting seconds were counting down, and here we go. Take a look at that. All 33 Raptor engines on Super Heavy Booster 14 lit up flawlessly. This is of course now the second time that this booster has launched. Indeed, the very first Super Heavy booster to refly, which is a gigantic milestone of its own. Just look at that beautiful exhaust plume as it rips through max Q. Essentially, the moment that Starship is undergoing the maximum mechanical stress in the launch. Ascent continued with the vehicle sideways. That is done, by the way, so that the flaps on the ship don't generate unwanted lift as it ascends into the sky. With it now having left the majority of the atmosphere behind, the vehicle performed a roll as it was preparing itself for stage separation. Engines in the outer 2 rings shut down beautifully in sequence, and this was just beautiful. As SpaceX had already shared, some of the vents on the hot staging ring here were deliberately blocked off so that they could ensure the booster flip was started in a predictable way, and just like Dan stated earlier in the webcast, straight upward is exactly what they wanted, and by flipping the booster in this predictable manner, it'll require less propellant to be held in reserve tanks to compensate for a random flip. Now you can see from the angle of the ascent that flipping in this upward direction is the shortest path to face back to the landing site. This was a bigger deal than I think that many may have realised. This is so much smoother now, and with that propellant saving, it'll result in a little more payload mass to orbit. I assume that they will engineer a very similar solution to the next generation boosters with the permanently fixed integrated hot staging. Boostback once again relit all 10 engines in the middle ring, and can I just say it is amazing to see the Raptors here work super reliably, including of course the 29 that were flown before. Shutdown was exactly as expected too, and there was the hot staging ring jettison very soon after. Now, sadly, the flight information was quite lacking in this mission for the booster. You may have noticed that after stage separation, there was no longer any altitude or speed information displayed for the booster at this point. In fact, we didn't even have the speed of the ship here either, but that did at least return later. What we did have was the propellant load indicator around the engine layout for each stage, and then the booster's orientation. Overall, I think this new UI looks great, but I sure hope that we get more telemetry readouts again for the next flight. Awesome visuals at this point of the ship now well on its way to space as the booster came back down close to the launch site. Of course, they were not planning to catch it as we already knew, but we were still getting a nice tracking shot here. Amazingly, as it got to the denser parts of the atmosphere, the now signature orange glow of the single-use engine shielding appeared almost instantly. It did start somewhat asymmetric, and that is most likely due to the very high angle of attack that they were testing here. Indeed, SpaceX were trying to push this to the limits to see what they could find out with the sacrificial Booster 14. With it being late in the afternoon, there was sadly quite a bit of haze, but here we go, the landing burn had started up. It was supposed to fire up the 13 engines, but interestingly, this one engine here in the middle ring didn't fire up. SpaceX had planned to intentionally shut down a center engine to see how the booster would react, but that would have been one of the 3 center engines, and it wouldn't have been happening this early in the process, so that was the first sign that there was something not going to plan. Well, just replaying that in slow motion, it looks like the ignition occurred, resulting just a second or so later with this big fireball. With all engines now missing from the UI, it was clear that this was the end of Booster 14. SpaceX confirmed moments later that it had experienced a rapid unscheduled disassembly, so yeah, I suspect that the high angle of attack probably caused too much stress on the vehicle, leading it to crumple in on itself as the engines fired up. That is why it is so vital to do these extreme tests when it's in a safe location out in the ocean. Certainly glad they tried that out on this one instead of one coming in for a catch. Now, all eyes were of course back on the ship. Rewinding a bit, even fairly soon after the stage separation, it already looked like there was an unwanted leak developing in the false ceiling. Nevertheless, the nitrogen purge system seemed to ensure that the ship could continue firing away. We did notice this glow at the nozzle extension of the Raptor vacuum engine as well, which progressively got more intense the closer it got to engine cutoff. It didn't stop the vehicle, but certainly room for improvement. The 3 Raptor vacuum engines shut down, followed shortly after by the Center 3. Yes, the ship had finally again made it to its required trajectory. Now, interestingly, this liquid oxygen dump and propellant settling vent combination at the back lit up bright orange right as the shutdown happened. It could be that this had become super hot during the ascent, and then as soon as it started to vent pure oxygen, it created an environment where the coating could be burnt off. That coating we saw when the vehicle was being stacked on top of Booster 14. Anyway, great news that we had made it to the engine cutoff, but the news was obviously heading back downhill at this point. Almost directly after the engines cut off, the ship had started to tumble unexpectedly. It tried to counteract this with other vents, but as we would soon find out, some leaks occurred in the fuel systems inside the ship too. These are used for attitude control to keep the ship stable as it coasts in space. That didn't stop SpaceX from showing us several different angles of the payload bay though, one looking down onto the simulator satellite and the forward dome beneath, and of course the 4 main rails which act as main guides for the Starlink satellites to move them up and down. All these particles here floating around showed off the uncontrolled spin as their movement changed as the coast went on. Unfortunately, SpaceX were not able to open the payload bay door to test the deployment. The spin itself may have stopped the door opening process. You could imagine that there may be some programmed limits that stops this if the ship is rolling. The Raptor relight was also skipped, and of course there was no way to reorient the ship for re-entry either. Yeah, once again SpaceX were not going to pick up most of that vital data needed for the heat shield and the Block 2 forward flaps. This was a big bummer because this mission was specifically engineered to test the heat shield thoroughly given the 100 plus missing tiles placed in key areas, so it's a shame for sure. Starship was instead ordered to go through an automated safing process to vent the remaining pressure at this point. That meant it was in the safest condition possible for an uncontrolled re-entry. Amazingly, the power of Starlink once again shone through as the ship continued to head into the thicker atmosphere. Even with the tumble, it was still sending a signal back. Just look at this, that aft flap really wasn't having a good time there, rapidly melting away. Contact with Starship was soon lost, with all debris falling within the planned hazard area in the Indian Ocean. So here we are, another flight down with a number of problems to solve. Just in the past day, the FAA has confirmed that they require a mishap investigation specifically around the ship loss of attitude control that led to the uncontrolled re-entry. On the flip side, the booster anomaly was no issue as that was covered within the predetermined test exceptions. Even with the unfortunate ending of both vehicles though, they did gain a lot of new data. With each flight, they gained the knowledge needed to further improve the system. I am seeing a lot of people argue that they should just move on to the next generation of boosters and ships in development, but they can only be launched from the new Pad B, which obviously isn't yet ready. I'll come back to that, but before we jump in, a huge thank you to Odoo for sponsoring today's video. If you've ever sold anything, you know how frustrating invoicing can be. It's one of those things that should be simple, but often ends up eating a ton of time. That's where Odoo's invoicing app comes in. Say you're selling 5 of these super awesome 3D printed Starship models. With invoicing, you can create a customer profile, add your products sold with the quantity, add the price, and generate a polished invoice in seconds. No fiddling with spreadsheets or copying and pasting line items. Of course, you want to include your logo and a custom layout too, right? Yes, you can do that too. Odoo lets you send your invoice directly to your customer with built-in email templates. Even better, they can pay it online with just a few clicks through the customer portal, and it's even integrated with popular payment methods. Indeed, make it easier to pay, and that may well make it easier to see those dollars rolling in. What if a customer forgets to pay you though? Odoo allows you to track in real time what's been paid, what's overdue, and how your business is tracking overall. Odoo offers a full suite of business apps from inventory, accounting, customer relationship management, and much more. They integrate seamlessly with each other. Yes, Odoo is designed to grow with you, so give it a try. Your first app is free for life with unlimited hosting and support. The link is right there below. Thank you, Odoo. So yes, I've seen many argue that perhaps SpaceX should just focus on the next generation of vehicles, but until Pad B is ready, they simply can't. Remember, there are still 3 more Block 2s left that can only launch from Pad A, so they may as well use them and get all the information they can, even if these have been problematic. You never know what lessons will be learned for the Block 3 design anyway. Now, I think it is going to be interesting to see what happens with Pad A once Pad B comes online. It could still be used for catching in the short term, I imagine, but the launch mount and other areas are not designed for the next generation of vehicles. What do you think that they will do with Pad A? Let me know in the comments. Now that is just the start of future talk, because of course the huge information drop came this Thursday as the Road to Mars talk was released. This was 42 minutes long with loads of great stuff. It kicked off with these incredibly nice views of the brand new booster forward dome and integrated hot staging adapter for the next generation vehicle. Yeah, that looks like an absolute work of art, doesn't it? What caught everybody's immediate attention is that there is not 4 grid fins now, there are just the 3 on the booster spread 90 degrees apart. So essentially it's like Falcon 9, but one of the 4 grid fins has been removed entirely. What's more, they look to be directly mounted inside the liquid methane tank. Right at the top, you can see how the diagonal trusses will carry all the weight of the ship as the vehicle ascends into the sky, followed of course by the hot staging. Now, because this is so much more open, the exhaust gases will flow out to the sides much more easily. I can't wait to see this in action. This Block 3 Super Heavy is set to be just a little bit taller at 72.3 metres tall, and with that comes the increase of propellant capacity to 3,650 tonnes. It is all very cool, and I'm sure we'll be getting used to that funky grid fin layout in no time. So next up we saw the booster aft end and the 33 Raptor 3 engines at the bottom. SpaceX have drastically reduced the amount of heat shielding at the same time as increasing the performance. The matching next generation ship is also heavily changing. This gains 50 tonnes of propellant capacity to bring it to a total of 1,550 tonnes. For now, they're starting off continuing with just 3 Raptor vacuum engines and a total thrust of 1,600 tonnes. Take a look at the shielding in the centre there covering the gimbaling hardware of the Raptors. That looks amazing, and interestingly, it seems that this vehicle will already be capable of bringing 200 tonnes to orbit. In fact, Elon mentioned that if the entire vehicle was not reused, it would be more like 400 tonnes. Obviously better to refly with half the payload to orbit if you're not just discarding it every time. Now, a lot of this increase is actually achieved purely by Raptor 3, as that has firstly reduced the vehicle mass with over a tonne saved per Raptor. Just take note of the Raptor 3 vacuum engine here as well, and then the huge stockpile of Raptor 2s in the background, presumably all to be used for the last few flights of the current vehicle. I will say, glorious footage of it on the test stand here too, and they've already done over 300 engine tests with over 16,000 seconds of runtime, so over 53 seconds on average per engine test. As they've mentioned a number of times, eventually they are looking to move to 6 Raptor vacuum engines on the upper stage Starship, which of course brings it to 42 Raptors in total, because of course it does. Now they've sort of teased the future version, which stretches out to a ridiculous 142 meters tall, but that for now seems a much more distant idea that is bound to evolve. But where are all these vehicles going to be made? Well, in the gigabays in Texas and Florida, and they've already been hard at work preparing everything here. Coincidentally, at Starbase, Texas, this means making room as we have been watching for weeks, and the time had come for the high bay to be strategically removed. It started with the side facing the highway, soon the backside was down, and finally there they were wrapping up the destruction with the side closest to Mega Bay 1. Now it's full steam ahead to prepare the ground here for the foundations of the Gigabay. Eventually, with all this production area, SpaceX's goal is to produce a staggering 1,000 ships a year, which will be spread across the facilities in Texas and Florida. Everything that they are doing here is for one huge goal in mind: colonising Mars. Now, an intriguing challenge that I hadn't thought a great deal about before is that the Mars atmosphere has a lot more atomic oxygen locked inside the carbon dioxide that makes up the atmosphere. In re-entry plasma, that free oxygen wants to burn the heat shield. This is a tricky problem, and given that they want to have the same heat shield designed to work not just for Earth but also Mars, that material testing and development is an extraordinarily difficult problem to solve, and it'll be likely having tweaks for years. Saying that, it is believed to be achievable. There was just so much in this. They dove into the transfer windows to Mars and the dream of how many starships could be sent with payloads increasing for each window all the way through to 2033. Certainly aspirational, but yeah, notice the payload looks to be some fairly minimal test equipment with the 10 tons for 2026. That is assuming that they can achieve this though. Elon did specifically mention that being a bit of a 50-50 sort of chance with all of the challenges ahead. One of those, of course, being propellant transfer. If they do make it, each ship would be launched with a small payload, and then the ships themselves will be refilled in orbit, not via a propellant depot in the short term at least. Now, I'm not too sure if those renders of the ships here at Mars are fully accurate, but that sure does look like the currently in use Starlink Pez dispenser. Very different to the payload bay doors that we see in the designs for the later Mars transfer windows. Eventually, they expect to also deploy Martian Starlinks, which is a wild thing to think about, and we are now even talking about candidate base locations with the suitable conditions. Yeah, there is a lot more crammed in here, so do check out the full video. I've got that linked for you down below in the description if you missed it. Now, of course, we have plenty of future vehicle production to share. This week we spotted another 4-ring tall barrel section head into Mega Bay 1, which now brings the liquid oxygen tank up to a total of 15 rings tall. We expect a few more of these plain barrels to be stacked as well before the most exciting section comes out, that thrust section. Next door, Ship 38 is now being finalised. The downcomer installation stand was lifted out and lowered to the ground. Its thrust section was then rolled into the Mega Bay, signifying that it was now being fully stacked. Now this will be the last of the 3 current generation ships, so all eyes are now going to be on the next generation, starting with what we assume will be Ship 39. With Flight 9 out of the way, it has already been hinted that Flight 10 could be sometime in June, with hopefully flights now every 3 to 4 weeks. Ship 36 will be the upper stage for that next epic event, and in fact, one of the aft flaps for that was lifted inside Mega Bay 2 just the other day. A vacuum Raptor was moved inside as well, so we'll be counting this one down before we know it. You might have noticed that Ship 37, the upper stage for Flight 11, was missing here. Indeed, earlier in the week the thrust simulator stand rolled into the ring yard, and that was soon placed on top. Neat detail there, seeing all the workers leave the workstation and make their way to the stand to ensure that everything is fully aligned, including of course those mounting plates where the Raptors eventually mount to. This lift was once again done with the slings over the catch points, which the team soon unhooked, and in no time the ship had moved out. As you can see, the forward flaps are not yet installed, but they don't need them for cryo testing anyway. After a brief pause at the Sanchez area, it rolled out to Massey's. For now, we leave you with that sitting in the cryo test position. Now, just a few hours before Ship 37 arrived, Test Tank 17 had had its first test done, which seems to be a normal cryo test. The actuators on the side haven't been hooked up yet, so expect more testing this coming week. So heading back to the launch site, how is that new pad coming along? Well, super nicely actually. Shaun captured that progress and we can see now that the elbow now connects up to the 2 manifolds. In fact, on the stream the other day, we could see that another manifold has been delivered and it will be installed on one of the 2 other sides very soon, with the cradles now also being welded on. That was lifted to the launch mount later this week. Looking towards the other position, we can already see some of the base structure being welded onto the top pancake. Close by, those propellant lines here are heading towards where we expect one of the 2 quick disconnect systems will be installed on the launch mount. Now, more parts like this showed up as well, which appears to be one of the 2 booster quick disconnect hoods, so it's moving faster than we can really keep up, especially this week. So yes, along with all of that, we had SpaceX's 32nd commercial resupply services mission wrapping up with Cargo Dragon. This was launched back in April, packed with supplies for the station, and it had a fairly lengthy return home. It had undocked on the Friday, but it was a long wait to the re-entry back to Earth. In fact, it was actually screaming through the atmosphere early Sunday morning almost a week ago, splashing down off the California coast. Unfortunately, NASA didn't provide a live stream this time around, but Dragon was spotted in the early morning darkness across California, a truly awesome sight for those lucky enough to catch it. A whole bunch of Falcon 9 action too. Mixed in with the Starlink missions, we had GPS 37 flying away there just yesterday on Friday afternoon. Space Launch Complex 40 there disappearing behind in the view, and I think it's worth noting that originally the GPS satellite was supposed to launch on ULA's new Vulcan, but it was reassigned to the Falcon 9. Given that Vulcan has only launched twice, I imagine that all has to do with flight readiness at this point. With that intriguing issue on Vulcan's last flight back in October, the one where the solid rocket booster nozzle fell off, we are yet to see a big frequency update in these missions. Anyway, a nice smooth ascent into orbit as always. Interestingly, similar to the SV06 mission, there was a hypergolic kick stage of sorts attached to the GPS satellite. Now this is installed to give the extra delta V needed to finalise its destined orbit after leaving Falcon 9. Apparently, even with the additional hardware here, it's still cheaper to launch compared to using a Falcon Heavy or Vulcan anyway. This is a pretty good solution because Falcon 9 isn't quite big enough to do it alone while still landing on a drone ship. Another standard landing there, of course. At this point, we just needed to await the deployment of GPS 37, and there it goes on its way. Of course, it wouldn't be a typical week without a regular dose of Starlink action. Right after our video went live last week, SpaceX were already back at it. Over at Slick 40, veteran booster 1069 was lifting off, this time carrying Starlink Group 1222. The booster's experience there had the black soot all hiding behind the frost. Off it went on its 24th flight, and with 23 Starlink satellites on board. Again, 13 on top there equipped with the direct-to-cell capability. The booster there was landing on the drone ship, a shortfall of gravitas. Next up was the Group 17-1 mission Tuesday morning from Vandenberg. Lucky Flight 13 for Booster 1082, 24 Starlink satellites to deploy, and of course I still love you out there for the catch. There was still more to come though. Group 1032 was off the following morning from Pad 39A, and with this flight we also had the first appearance of the updated stream broadcast layout, similar in design to what we saw with Starship's Flight Test 9. Cool to see that G-force readout on the ascent, I will say. Falcon 9 there gets up to 3.9G for the Starlink missions, stage separation, and there were the 27 Starlink satellites stacked at fairing jettison. I think this new UI is interesting. Notice on the entry burn they selectively hide the altitude to show the engine diagram. The problem, of course, with hiding and showing stuff selectively is that you are missing some information at any given time, admittedly while gaining some other information. It would be nice if perhaps they could include a little mini altitude readout under the booster engine diagram in that specific case. That just means that when you switch away, you don't miss the data entirely. Finalising this one, it was just read the instructions out there as the platform for Booster 1080's 19th landing. I must say, I loved the daylight views for all of these. The timing has just lined up beautifully for all of these scenes. Now, this coming week, we are also going to be watching the updates from iSpace quite closely. Indeed, after all this time, we are finally coming up to the lunar landing of the Resilience lander. This should, if all goes to plan, be happening towards the end of this coming week. The planned maneuvers in play are obviously critical in shaping the lunar orbit. It needs to be super precise to have that aligned as needed with the landing coordinates. This area is strategically placed near the lunar North Pole, and they've chosen it because it gives a nice balance with the science announced that they can perform here along with the operational advantages. iSpace were scheduled to have completed all of the lunar orbital maneuvers on Wednesday, and right now that all looks to have gone very well. So yes, best of luck to iSpace and the Resilience lander over this coming week. Hopefully I'll be talking about the amazing landing in next weekend's update. So it's been a while since I've talked about the James Webb Space Telescope, but this one caught my eye for sure. Focus in on this new picture of the month where the centerpiece is the colossal galaxy cluster Abell S1063. It's an absolute heavyweight lying about 4.5 billion light years away. At first glance, this is a massive white elliptical core that grabs your attention, this gravitational giant surrounded by dozens of galaxies. But look closer, see those curved streaks of light all around? Those aren't just pretty arcs, they're ancient galaxies warped and magnified through the powerful effect of gravitational lensing. How cool is that? This isn't the first time that we've looked into this galaxy cluster before. Hubble had taken a good swing at it during its Frontier Fields campaign, but the thing is, Webb's NIRCam easily took this to the next level. This new image combines 9 different infrared wavelengths over a lengthy 120-hour observation. It was zooming right in on some of the faintest, most distant galaxies that we've ever seen. By using Abell S1063 like a giant cosmic magnifying glass, Webb is reaching further back in time than ever before, possibly catching light from galaxies that formed just 200 million years after the Big Bang. This deep field image might even be whispering clues about Population 3 stars, the first to ever shine. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It was a dense one. If you did, don't forget to hit subscribe so we get to keep making them. If you want to continue with more space goodness, check out this video here next, or maybe these videos. Thanks for watching all this way through. As always, I will see you all in the next video.